This is the Philanthropy Show, connecting and inspiring philanthropy.
Welcome to the Philanthropy Show. I'm your host, Louanne Saraga Walters, and today we're talking about something that happens in every nonprofit's life. You reach this inevitable space. You've got to find a new CEO. Now, it might be a part of a strategic plan or a succession plan, or you actually could need one right now. So whether you're a staff member or a board member, our guests today are going to address some of those issues for you. Very glad that you two have joined us.
Our pleasure.
We have Michelle Turman with Catalyst Consulting Services and Ron Christaldi, who is the board chair of the Greater Tampa Chamber, in a primary role speaking to today, but has served on a number of boards in the past, I know, as well as your full-time profession. So thanks for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Before we actually launch into the issue at hand, I do want to kind of follow your backgrounds a little bit. So Michelle, we'll start with you. How did you become involved in the nonprofit community?
I've been involved over 21 years in nonprofit, whether it was as a CEO or a COO or as a development director, and working for different organizations in the Tampa Bay area in the United States. And so ultimately I started my own company and seeing a need to really fill the executive searches, capacity building, and organizational assessments. And so it's something that I've been doing for a long time, as well as serving on boards over the last 21 years and making an impact in the community.
You know, in talking with you too, what I like about this aspect is that you actually served as a C-level person at a nonprofit, so you can speak to that too from that standpoint. And Ron, what's your background?
Sure. I come at the not-for-profit world kind of from two different aspects that kind of converge together. First, I'm an attorney, a business lawyer with the law firm of Shoemaker, Loop & Kendrick, and in that capacity, I represent and provide legal services to a number of not-for-profit organizations, the largest of which has about an $800 million a year budget, and the smallest of which has a very small budget and no employees, and is more of a grassroots organization.
That's a wide range.
And then also, given my profession and my feeling of a sense of commitment to the community, I've served on a number of not-for-profit boards, currently serving as chair of the Greater Tampa Chamber of Commerce board, and I've served on boards for domestic violence, youth programs, arts and cultural organizations, on the executive committee, and as chair of those organizations as well.
And he's a very busy attorney, so I do want to take a pause and just say, you know, a lot of times we know that our staff are really busy, but our board members are full-time professionals. So thank you for taking the time to serve on as many boards and be involved with as many nonprofits as you have, and leading them too. So leading today through this this issue, which I want to find out, what is the current climate right now? We're seeing a lot across the country. We're seeing a lot of CEO positions, COO positions, CIO become open. And can we look at kind of the whys behind that, and then we'll go further into what do we do about it now as staff and board? So why are we seeing so many CEOs departing?
I think a big portion of it is that you're seeing an uptick in the economy, and so therefore you're seeing other opportunities that might be available, and therefore people are resigning to maybe look at those opportunities. Maybe it's higher pay, expanding their resume, but then you're also seeing individuals that are ready to retire because they're seeing this change in the economy and they're getting more comfortable with that. So we know from a national level there's about an 8% increase in terms of transitions through retirement moving forward because of the change in the economy.
Do you think too it might, you know, we've got this baby boomer generation now who's starting well, many have already retired, but it's quite a few years, and so over the next several years we're going to see more of them leave. And we've done a couple of generational shows, and I think the statistics are, if I'm close, I'm going to kind of gauge it, that 75-ish million baby boomers are retiring. The next generation are 20-something millennials, which are the Gen Xers, that's us. And so we can't possibly fill all of those seats. But then the next generation are the millennials with 80 million strong, but they're not yet ready for the succession plan. They're not yet ready to step into, and many of them are not, to step into a C-level position. What do we do with this situation? Where do we go from here?
Accelerated mentoring.
Accelerated mentoring.
I wouldn't underestimate the millennials though too. I think that they come at challenges from a fresh perspective. I think that the ability to process information in today's age is much greater than it was 50 or 100 years ago, and so they can learn from the past and step into those roles. But I think it's incumbent upon the current leadership today start thinking strategically about how to, particularly in an organization that's mission-driven, on how to preserve that mission long-term, and how are we going to start bringing folks in for continuity so those changes aren't abrupt and there's no gaps in the provision of services or in relations with donors or the community.
And Ron, you as a board member and the wide variety of boards that you've been on, both large and small, you've experienced some of this CEO retirement. What's been your experience from a board standpoint?
Absolutely. It's a very daunting task to replace a CEO, particularly an iconic CEO who's been around for a long time. I think that the recruitment process is a very important process, so you need transparency and a lot of process. The thing that I've found is immediately when the position opens, you'll get 100 different people reaching out that have never worked in that industry before, but they know somebody and they really think that they can do it. The board is the steward of that, and having transparency and good process is critical, but you can alleviate a lot of the potential disruption by good strategic planning. And that's what folks like Michelle help companies do, is think ahead 5 or 10 years to have that plan in place, to have the right people in place so that transition is smooth. Maybe I know you do that all the time.
Absolutely. Looking and seeing what the needs are going to be and working with the staff, because there is going to be a gap. There's going to be a gap in that talent, and how do you fill that gap?
Well, it's already time for our first break, so we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I really want to talk about what does that look like? What are the responsibilities from the staff's point of view and from the board's point of view to help that succession plan, the strategic planning along? So we'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Follow the Philanthropy Show on Facebook for behind-the-scenes action, polls, and commentary. This show sponsored in part by
My Paper Pusher. Consider it done.
Welcome back to the Philanthropy Show, talking today about the succession planning, the need for a strategic plan to have a CEO in place, with Michelle Turman and also Ron Christaldi, two very experienced folks in this arena. And we, right before the break, we kind of reached the conclusion of we do have to put some thought into this succession plan in order to not be in the position of, what do we do now? So let's start with the staff perspective. What is essential that staff look at now, including the current CEO, into preparing to keep this organization alive and breathing following that CEO's departure?
I think some of the things that organizations can be doing is, number one, ensuring that there's a strategic plan in place and that has been completed so that the strategic direction, whether it's 3 to 5 years, is set. I think secondarily, having an annual review of your top leadership staff as well as the CEO so that you can understand the talent that you have and potential talent that you're going to need to recruit or retain if there is a shift in leadership. I think updating all of your operational manuals and policies and procedures so that when the person comes in, whether it's an internal talent or external talent, you don't have to be stuck down with those mundane internal details. They can really hit the ground running, get to know the stakeholders, the board members and people in the community.
And they know your culture.
Absolutely. So there's a lot that they can do internally to prepare for that. Nonprofits are notorious for not making it a priority because, quite frankly, it's not a priority. People are wearing many hats, and they don't really have the money, they think, to spend in terms of trying to put that time in. But just by preparing some of the things we've just discussed, they can at least get the internal operations set so that they can look at how they recruit, either from within or externally.
I think those are great points, and you just mentioned something we say a lot on the show, that nonprofits do wear a lot of hats and they're very busy, but the board's busy too, because here they are, full-time professionals, and yet they are giving of their time and talent and treasure to be a part of an organization and help it succeed. What's essential in this, Ron, from a board standpoint? What's a board member's role?
Sure. The most essential thing first is to understand what the board member's role is. It's not to engage in the operations of the company, but it's to set the policy for the company and to set the right priorities for the CEO. So one of the things that the board has to always do is stay focused on the mission of the organization.
Great point.
In engaging the CEO and engaging what the benchmarks for the CEO would be, make sure that all of those things tie collectively back to the mission of the organization. So budget is important, but meeting budget is not the most important thing if you haven't met the mission of the organization. Establishing those criteria for the CEO that will help drive the mission of the organization, establishing a strategic plan that meets the mission and goals of the organization, and setting the overall policy, and being a sounding board and a resource for the leadership of the organization, the staff leadership of the organization.
What about in a situation where a lot of nonprofits have found themselves recently that all of a sudden, bam, now there's this CEO opening. Maybe there is, or maybe there is not, a strategic plan in place, but they need somebody right now. What can be done? What are steps to kind of ease this panic, really?
There's a couple options there. I mean, that what we call an emergency exit, if you will. That's one of the ways that they would leave. But I know my firm offers that interim services. I think typically what happens, though, is that boards struggle with, do we need to get somebody in there right now to stabilize the institution and not conducting a proper search? Or could we bring in somebody in the interim and maybe focus and stabilize some of the pieces that we just talked about, so that when we do bring somebody in, and also give proper time to hiring the right person. So I think trying to get the board collectively to take a step back and look at the talent that is needed before they bring somebody in into the potential minutia of the organization is really important, so that whoever they decide to bring in or recruit from within is intentional and it's going to meet the future goals of the organization and not just the immediate need.
And I want to talk about what those look like. Go ahead, Ron.
I was going to just add, not to be rash about it, not to hire somebody right away, but also to not to believe that you know how to run the organization as a board member. You may be a great lawyer, you may be a great accountant, you may be a great doctor, but you probably don't know how to run an art museum. And one mistake I see organizations make at the board level in a CEO transition is to believe that they can run the operations of the company from the board level in the interim. It's important to get that interim help. It's important not to be hasty and get the right person in that's going to serve the mission of the organization.
That is such a great point, and I too have seen that happen. And I've also seen people not realizing that there are firms like yours that offer the interim. So you hear the interim CEO or the interim COO, and that's okay. As long as I think maybe the cultures fit of the firm that you're bringing in with the firm that they're filling in. So what are some of those big points, though, that staff, that board need to think about from a standpoint of what characteristics, what skill sets, et cetera, should they be looking for in a CEO? How do they determine that?
Well, I think number one, you can always do a needs assessment. The board can actually participate in that exercise to see what is needed based on the current status of the organization and the skills that are required, and then what the future looks like. And that could potentially mean strategic alliances or mergers, but to think about what is going to be needed for that.
So needs assessment. We may be in the black, but we'd have a lack of staff to get the jobs completed.
Correct.
Or we may have an abundance of staff and we're in the red, or any type of...
Identifying those qualities and also ranking those qualities, because it's going to be unusual that you'll find one person who's excellent at operations, excellent at HR, excellent at fundraising, excellent at having political contacts for the organization. And you might identify what all of the needs for that CEO position might be, but you also have to rank them, because if you find somebody that's got 3 of the 7, but they're the 3 least important to the organization at the time, you can be clouded and maybe put the wrong person in the position.
Well, but that's a point. That's a great point, because what happens when you say, well, here's this great potential person that fills this, this, and this, and hey, we got half of what we wanted, but it's not necessarily fitting your long-term plan. What's the danger in that?
Right. Yeah, the danger is you can lose your funding, for instance. If the person's not good with the donor base, you'll lose your, or for instance, if somebody's not good from a culture perspective with the employees of the organization, you can have high turnover, which also leads to deterioration of the organization. So having all of those things hitting is very important. Having someone who understands what their strengths and weaknesses are and how they're going to, talking in the interview process about what the strengths and weaknesses are and how the CEO plans to backfill those things. If they're not strong in a particular area of finances, are they going to recruit a good CFO for the organization or have one in place?
You just actually made me think of something that I'd like to toss out to you, and literally it just came into my little noggin.
That's good.
But I know, it's always wonderful when you have new thoughts, right? But it's what if you are that CEO that got tapped to be into that place and you find yourself truly without the skill set needed to do that job? What can you do in talking with the staff or the board? I mean, that's a scary predicament. I mean, here you're wanting this job, and then all of a sudden you go, well, I don't fit.
You know, that happens all the time, whether you're recruited internally or even somebody coming into the organization. When you get to know the lay of the land of what's needed, you might say, you know, I'm really not a fundraiser and they really need somebody that's going to raise funds, or I'm not politically savvy. How do I work with somebody to acquire those advocacy skills? So there's a couple ways you can do that. I know here at Nonprofit Leadership Center, they have a CEO forum to help you acquire those skills. I think another route, if you have the funds to do so, is talk to the board about the possibility of hiring an executive coach. That's also a possibility in what they'll invest in that leader moving forward. But I think also, to Ron's point, is looking to see the staff around you. Do you really need to be that person? One thing I want to sort of harken back in terms of the transition that's also helpful, that sort of came to light when we were talking, is, you know, when you have a transition, ensuring that a board member or staff members also have those relationships that the CEO had, so that no matter what that transition is, either hiring or getting somebody to acquire the skill set, there's either people on board or there's people within the organization that are not losing touch with, whether it's advocacy, donor relationships, or even political contacts, and that doesn't get lost while either the person's garnering that skill set, building the skill set, or either hiring people that he needs or she needs around them.
And the good leadership is always self-reflective and self-evaluative and surrounds itself with talent. And so the CEO, if they are a good leader, will do that, and the board members, if they are good leaders, they will understand that and encourage that activity. No company is run well by one person. It takes a good general counsel, a good CFO, a good CEO, a good director of operations, good consultants, and it's the strength of the collective wisdom of the group that will make the company stronger and will drive the mission.
You both hit on something that I want to get into in the next segment, but we have to take a break. And when we come back, I really want to dive into how do you build the bench of the people, the talent that you already have on staff. They may not be ready right now, but they could be in the future. Quick break, and we'll be right back.
And now a word from our studio sponsor.
What story is told by your nonprofit financial statements? Do you struggle with telling a clear, compelling financial story that makes sense to your staff and your supporters? What things matter most when examining financial statements, and how can anyone assess true financial health? Hi, my name is Lorraine Faithful. I am the Operations Manager at Nonprofit Leadership Center. According to Nonprofit Finance Fund, there are a number of indicators of nonprofit financial health. Income statement indicators include revenue reliability, consistent surpluses, and full cost coverage. Balance sheet indicators include the ability to manage debt, to steward facilities, and appropriate liquidity. Numbers can tell a lot about a nonprofit's finances, but they can have their limitations too. If your nonprofit agency is floundering with financial health or the assessment of financial health, take a look at the many free resources found on our website at nonprofitleadershipcenter.com and look under Financial Management Resources. Thank you.
The Philanthropy Show is on demand every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at both thephilanthropyshow.com and YouTube/watch MVVP TV.
Welcome back to the Philanthropy Show, talking today about, a number of things with succession planning, strategic planning. What do you do when you're out a CEO? How do you build the bench for the next CEO, which is kind of where we are now. So what does that look like? We may have, for example, the millennials that are already on staff. They may not yet be ready to step into a C-level role. But what can we look at from the staff and the board of building that bench for the long-term, I guess, the longevity of our nonprofit?
I think in terms of millennials, looking to see what they need and what they require within an organization is going to be so much different than maybe your more senior staff, people that have been there a little bit longer. And so, but I think mentoring is equally effective for both. Whether you're talking about reverse mentoring, where you have generations like ourselves looking to younger generations on how to stay relevant, whether it's with technology and in the workplace.
I think that's a good point. I want to pause you real quick because it's very important that we recognize that. Sometimes we tend to look at younger generations and say, well, we need to coach them into, but there's a lot that we can learn as well, and that's as viable for the health of your organization.
You're starting to see that a lot more, the reverse mentoring. But I think also mentoring, which is something I'm very passionate about, and it's starting at USF with Women in Leadership and Philanthropy, is how do we take young leaders, in this case particularly women, but also men, and how do you align them with somebody that can help them, groom them, whether it is what you need to do for professional education in your respective field or for a respective organization, and your long-term plan. And so that is a part of professional development that I think gets lost. And if you're an effective CEO or even a COO, because you're really, this is more an operational issue, it's how can you get your staff to be the best they can be. Mentorship is a piece of it, but also looking long-term at what your needs are going to be and how you retain that talent is really important in terms of what you're going to have and who you surround yourself with to meet the goals of the organization.
So
Skills analysis. Go ahead.
Yeah, and one practical way you can do that as a board, for instance, is to create board committees in various areas and have your governing documents reflect that you don't need to be a board member to serve on a committee. So it's an opportunity to have other people come in from the community, because diversity is really the strength of the organization, and diversity in all different ways.
By serving on that committee, they're introduced to your organization, they kind of get familiar
You
with
can learn about the mission, you can learn a little bit about them and draw on their practical and professional expertise, and also mentor them into the organization, eventually testing folks who could be board members while increasing the diversity of thought that's feeding the organization.
I love it. Wow. Well, you both have shared a lot of great information this morning, and so thank you for coming on. This is definitely not going to go away anytime soon. We're, in fact, probably going to see more and more, right, as the baby boomers are retiring. So hopefully got some good nuggets from that. And now it is time for our Truth or Care, which is, what is your heart's definition of philanthropy? Why do you do what you do? How did you get involved? Why are you passionate about nonprofits?
Well, for me, it's sort of a double answer because, you know, I do it during the day, but it's also part of who I am personally. And so I do believe in sharing your time, treasure, talent with organizations. But I would say for me, the story really began as someone who grew up in South Tampa and was a scholarship recipient for the YMCA. So we didn't have enough money to actually be a member of the Y, and we received a scholarship as a family to join. It was a place to go, having a single parent, and to do that. And I never really forgot that. And as the years went on, when I look at board service, where I spend my time or where I give my dollars, or even as a family when we give our dollars and what we give to, I find that I'm sharing my time, treasure, and talent with those organizations that helped me, helped build me up, or having a positive impact on my family and the community. Because at the end of the day, I would like my children to leave a legacy in the community. So philanthropy for me is really about what I do during the day, but it's also something that I do in my personal time, and it's very passionate, and it's hopefully the legacy I'll leave behind for our children.
And it's something that you connected with it at a young age, and it made an impact on you personally. And that's where I like that. Thank you, Michelle. Ron?
Sure. My source of philanthropy really comes twofold. One, from my most prominent mentor, a fellow by the name of David Delapart, who early in my career told me that I had a tool of being a lawyer that was also a responsibility, a very significant responsibility. He and his dad had given a lot back, and he still continues to give a lot back to the community, and taught me some fundamental principles to pick things that your heart is in. Don't pick them to build your resume, but pick things that you believe in, that your heart is in, and get engaged and take a leadership role and see those things through. That was then taken to a new level when I had my first son. I have 3 children. And all of a sudden I realized that we all have a responsibility to leave this place better than we found it, because it's not just about us, it's not just about our time, it's about the future. What we're doing today is going to affect how our kids play and work and interact with each other and the quality of life they have and the world that they live in. And that's why I'm engaged, so that the next generation has something else to build on.
Oh, that's very cool. And I love the mentor aspect as well. Wow. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, our pleasure.
Just really enjoyed having you both on
Thank you.
today. Thank you, Michelle,
Yeah,
and
my
thank you,
pleasure.
Ron. And that's going to wrap up another Philanthropy Show, but make sure that you go to thephilanthropyshow.com and check out the past shows tabs for all of the wonderful stories and shared experiences that we've had so far this year. We'll see you next Monday at 4. Bye-bye.
have an idea for the Philanthropy Show? Contact us via our website or email us at tps@myvideovoice.com.